All right, everyone. Thank you for your patience while I got this up for you. It's a relatively long PowerPoint presentation. It's 101 slides, as you will see in your Google Drive. But really wanting to give you a foundation for this approach since we're only covering it for 1 week, and we'll hop into role plays this week. All right, so the first reading that we have is clarifying the negative cycle in EFT. So this chapter introduces one of the most fundamental interventions in EFT, clarifying the negative cycle. If you learn nothing else from EFT this week, this is the piece that will show up in almost every EFT informed session you ever conduct. Importantly, clarifying the cycle is not about conflict resolution or problem solving. It is about helping couples see how their relationship gets hijacked when attachment security feels threatened. The goal is not insight for its own sake, it is emotional safety and de escalation. The authors are very explicit. The purpose of clarifying the negative cycle is to move the problem out of the partners and into the interaction. With a sneeze. Excuse me. So this is deeply systemic. Instead of you're the problem or even we're the problem becomes the dance. This creates a meta perspective where both partners can step back and observe what happens to them under threat. Notice how consistent this is with EFT's collaborative stance. No one is framed as bad, broken, or deficient. This intervention sits at the intersection of systems theory and attachment theory. From a systems lens, we are tracking self-reinforcing loops, patterns that feed themselves. From an attachment lens, these loops are understood as failed attempts at regulating attachment distress. Emotion in EFT is not noise, it's the signal. What looks like anger, withdrawal, or criticism is often the surface expression of fear, loneliness, or longing. A key claim here is that relationship distress is not caused by conflict itself. Couples can survive enormous conflict. What predicts breakdown is the failure to repair and reconnect. The negative cycle blocks repair. Once the cycle takes over, partners are no longer oriented toward connection. They are oriented towards self-protection. Clarifying the cycle is how the therapist interrupts that automatic shift. This is one of the most important reframes in EFT. The cycle is positioned as the common enemy, something that attacks the relationship from the outside. Both partners are seen as reacting in understandable ways to threat. This is crucially clinical. This is crucial clinically, because shame and defensiveness drop when partners stop feeling morally evaluated. From here, curiosity becomes possible. The reading emphasizes that these positions are not personality traits, they are states that emerge under threat. The pursuer is typically responding to fears of abandonment or disconnection. The withdrawer is often responding to fears of rejection, failure, or being inadequate. Importantly, both positions are attempts to regulate emotion, and both paradoxically increase insecurity. From the very first session, the EFT therapist is listening on multiple levels at once. Content matters, but process matters more. The therapist listens for how partners respond to one another, how emotion escalates or shuts down, and what meaning is being made in real time. The cycle is often happening right there in the room, and that gives the therapist live material to work with. This is not a confrontational intervention. Partners are helped to own their steps gently and without shame. Validation is key here. These responses are framed as normal and human reactions to perceived attachment threat. Without validation, Clarification will feel like exposure rather than safety. One of the most teachable EFT skills appears here, evoking attachment meaning. The therapist repeatedly asks questions that slow the interaction down and access meaning beneath behavior. EFT assumes that what hurts is not the behavior itself, but what the behavior signals about availability, care, and importance. At this stage, the therapist mostly works with secondary emotion, but with an eye toward the primary emotion underneath. Therapists and students often want to rush past anger or withdrawal. EFT teaches us to stay with those reactions long enough to understand what they're protecting. Primary emotions will emerge later once safety increases. Catching bullets or catching arrows is a beautiful EFT phrase. When aggression or blame appears, the therapist intercepts it, not to shut it down, but to translate it. The therapist protects the attachment bond by reframing hostility as unspoken distress. This keeps the session emotionally alive but relationally safe. The summary is where the intervention really lands. The therapist weaves together behavior, emotion, meaning, and attachment consequences into a coherent narrative. Done well, this moment often feels relieving to clients. Oh, this is what happens to us. This shared understanding de escalates the cycle and prepares the ground for change. Once the cycle is named and externalized, couples can begin to notice it as it happens. This is not yet about creating a new interactional moves. That comes later. Right now, the task is containment and awareness. This completes the de escalation phase of stage one. So, this is an important slide to keep in mind. EFT is not applied indiscriminately. If clarifying the cycle would place a partner at greater risk, it should not be used. Similarly, when one partner is deeply disengaged or invested in pathologizing the other, the intervention will fail. EFT requires that at least minimal motivation for relational repair. So, this case of Sarah and Sam illustrates the intervention in real time. Notice how the therapist stays close to the present moment, tracks emotion carefully, and repeatedly links behavior to attachment meaning. The therapist is not neutral in an abstract sense. They are actively shaping a new emotional experience by slowing, validating, and reframing the interaction. So, for your role play, you are not expected to access deep primary emotion yet. Your task is to practice seeing the cycle and speaking it aloud in a way that feels safe and collaborative. If you can help a couple say, "This thing takes over us," you're doing EFT. All right, so the next chapter on deepening attachment emotion in EFT. So, this reading moves us from seeing the negative cycle to transforming it. If clarifying the negative cycle is about safety and orientation, deepening attachment emotion is about change. This is where EFT becomes unmistakably experiential. The goal is not insight alone, but emotional engagement that reorganizes the attachment bond. EFT is built on a strong empirical claim. Relationship change happens when partners are emotionally engaged with one another in new ways. Research consistently shows that it is not problem solving, insight, or communication skills alone that predict outcome. It is the quality of emotional engagement. Emotion organizes how partners respond, reach, and withdraw. The reading highlights softenings as key therapeutic change events. Moments when a previously defensive or withdrawn partner accesses and shares vulnerable attachment emotion. These emotions are strongly associated with reductions in attachment anxiety and improved relationship satisfaction. This gives students a research-backed rationale for why EFT spends so much time on emotion. From an attachment perspective, distress disrupts emotional processing. Partners may downplay emotion, become flooded by it, or experience it in fragmented ways. Importantly, these are protective strategies. EFT does not judge them. It helps partners reorganize emotional experience so clearer signals can be sent and received. The purpose here is not catharsis, it is precision. Deepening emotion helps partners send clear attachment signals, signals that invite closeness rather than trigger defense. Vulnerability, when expressed safely, pulls partners closer and creates security. This reading deepens our earlier discussion of primary and secondary emotion. Secondary emotions dominate distressed interactions because they protect against vulnerability. The therapist's job is to gently guide partners toward the primary emotion that carry attachment needs without overwhelming them or their partners. These three Ds describe how EFT therapists transform emotion into connection. Deepening brings emotion alive in the body. Distilling helps the client clearly own it. Disclosing shares it in a way that invites responsiveness. Skipping steps or rushing disclosure is one of the most common trainee mistakes. Deepening means slowing down the client and helping them stay with this felt sense of emotion. This is not analysis. The therapist focuses on bodily sensations, emotional cues, and attachment meaning. The emotion must be alive in the room before it can reorganize interaction. Distilling emotion means helping clients recognize this is my experience. The experience is placed in context. This is what happens to me when the cycle takes over. Distillation gives the emotion coherence and prepares it for disclosure. Disclosure is not spontaneous confession, it is carefully scaffolded. The therapist ensures safety, invites the sharing, then checks out how it landed for both partners. This moment is often transformative when done well because it reorganizes how partners see each other. Risk is a practical guide for how therapists deepen emotion moment to moment. It reminds therapists to slow down, soften their voice, and use the client's own language. These micro skills help emotion deepen without becoming overwhelming. Repeating emotional laden words like crushed, scared, or not enough helps clients stay with their experience. These handles anchor emotion and prevent intellectualization. Repetition is not redundancy, it's application. So just so you know, I'm going through all of the risk right now. So here's R. I is images. Images evoke emotion more powerfully than labels. When therapists offer tentative images, clients often elaborate and deepen their own experience. This is collaborative, not interpretive. Simplicity, slowness, and softness. So, tone and pacing matter enormously here. Speaking slowly and softly helps regulate affect and signal safety. Simplicity keeps clients from retreating into analysis. These are regulation strategies as much as communication skills. Using the client's own words strengthens ownership and reduces shame. The therapist becomes a mirror rather than an authority figure, which aligns with EFT's collaborative lens. When vulnerability is shared, partners often experience each other differently. The withdrawn partner is no longer cold, but scared. The angry partner is no longer controlling, but lonely. This shift in perception fuels a new cycle of reaching and responding. So this is critical for trainees. Deepening attachment emotion must come after de-escalation. Without safety, vulnerability becomes dangerous and escalates the cycle. EFT is staged for a reason. So this case of Kyle and Tara illustrates how deepening unfolds moment by moment. Notice the therapist's patience, repetition, and focus on bodily experience. The enactment emerges organically once the emotion is alive and owned. Sorry, y'all, I woke up kind of sick this morning. The therapist repeatedly checks whether the emotion is alive now. If it is, that is the moment for disclosure. If not, the therapist continues deepening rather than pushing forward. So, this is the heart of EFT. Vulnerability evokes responsiveness, which creates security, which changes the bond. The therapist is choreographing new emotional experiences that partners can carry outside of the room. So, for the role play, your task is not to create dramatic disclosures. It is to practice slowing down, reflecting emotion, and tolerating intensity without fixing or reassuring too quickly. All right, so our next reading, Love, the Paradigm Shift. So this reading is a framing chapter. It's not teaching a micro intervention like clarifying the cycle or deepening emotion. It's shifting the paradigm trainees operate from or clinicians operate from. Johnson's core argument is if love is treated as mysterious, irrational, or merely sexual compatibility based, then therapy becomes a series of hacks, communication tricks, negotiation strategies, and symptom management. But if adult love is an attachment bond, then relationship distress becomes understandable. Couples protest, pursue, withdraw, shut down, or attack when their sense of emotional safety is threatened. EFT is positioned as a map, a way to reliably move couples from disconnection to secure engagement. Johnson is speaking directly to the field here. Historically, therapy often treated relationship distress as the sum of two individuals' psychologies. Fix the trauma response, fix the cognitive distortions, fix the communication deficit. Those can matter, but they often don't reorganize the couple bond. The shift is dyadic. Partners co-create patterns in real time. And those patterns become self reinforcing. So the unit of change in EFT is not just an individual's symptom reduction, it is the couple's emotional process, how they reach, how they respond, and how they repair. This is one of Johnson's most important claims. Humans are wired first for connection, not aggression, not sex, connection. Attachment isn't only about childhood, it's lifelong. Adults still need to know if I call you, will you answer? Secure bonds function as a safe haven in distress and a secure base for exploration. This concept becomes clinically actionable later because EFT asks when partners are distressed, what are they trying to get? Safety, reassurance, knowing they matter. This is where the reading connects directly to the first two EFT techniques we've already covered. Johnson says couples focus on the content, things like money, chores, sex, in-laws, but those are miniature dots. The real issue is often that partners no longer experience each other as emotionally accessible and responsive. That creates protest, things like pursuing, criticizing, and demanding, and self protection, things like withdrawing, shutting down, and defending. The cycle becomes the problem. Importantly, conflict isn't necessarily fatal. The breakdown happens when couples can't repair and connect. This is also a values level intervention. Many clinicians and clients have absorbed a cultural story that emotional dependence is weakness. Johnson flips it. Connection is strength. Secure attachment is associated with better mental and physical health outcomes, stress recovery, and resilience. Clinically, this matters because EFT often involves helping clients stop shaming themselves for wanting closeness. A big part of EFT is normalizing the attachment needs. It makes sense that you want reassurance. That's not immaturity, that's human. This is an important critique that clinicians and trainees should hear clearly. Communication training and negotiation strategies can be helpful, but under threat, the nervous system overrides them. Couples can, quote, use their script in session and still collapse at home when attachment panic hits. Johnson argues EFT works because it addresses the source, fear of losing connection. Once the bond is more secure, skills become easier to use and sustain. In other words, EFT isn't anti-skill. It just says skills land best after emotional safety is restored. So for role play, this reading gives you a lens. Don't get lost in content. Keep asking, what is the attachment question underneath? Usually it's something like, do I matter to you? Will you be there when I need you? Am I safe with you? Then your job is to apply the tools from the earlier readings. Clarify the negative cycle, deepen and distill primary emotion, choreograph disclosure that can evoke responsiveness. The reading gives meaning to the mechanics. All right, so here's more readings. So attachment, the key to love. All right, so Johnson opens by rejecting exchange theory, the idea that love is primarily a rational bargain about costs and benefits. She argues that distressed couples don't act like negotiators, they act like bonded beings in panic. Her central claim is simple and disruptive. Romantic love is an emotional attachment bond, similar in function to the caregiver bond. EFT makes sense only if we buy that premise, because EFT isn't mainly teaching negotiation skills, it's helping couples regain the felt sense of safety, responsiveness, and closeness that a bond requires. So, this chapter grounds adult love in the history of attachment science. Bowlby noticed something that contradicted dominant psychology. Kids can be fed and housed and still deteriorate, sometimes even die without touch and emotional connection. That's the failure to thrive phenomenon. The point for adult love is connection isn't a luxury, it's a survival system. Johnson is building the case that adult relationship distress is not trivial. It activates primal alarm systems. Johnson lays out attachment as an organized system with predictable features. We monitor connection. Under threat, we reach for an attachment figure. When we can't access them physically or emotionally, we experience separation distress. And paradoxically, the more secure the bond, the more free and autonomous we become. This is a key corrective for clinicians. EFT isn't promoting dependency in a pejorative sense. It's promoting secure connection as the foundation for flexibility and growth. Johnson reviews how attachment science moved from children to adults. The key idea: adults don't outgrow attachment, we transfer it. In adulthood, the attachment figure is often the romantic partner. Under threat, our partner becomes highly mentally accessible, even automatically. This is why couples fight most intensely when they feel alone, rejected, or unsafe with the person who matters the most. It's also why just calm down advice rarely works. The system is involuntary. These are not labels for character, they are strategies the nervous system uses when connection feels uncertain. Secure is, I can reach and you'll respond. Anxious is, I'm not sure you'll be there, so I escalate. This can look like protest, anger, criticism, or pursuit. Avoidant is, depending is risky, I'll shut down and handle it alone. This can look like withdrawal, minimization, numbness, and intellectualization. Johnson is also careful. Styles are relatively stable, but not immutable. Relationships can move people towards security over time, which is a direct bridge to what EFT claims it can do. This is the clinical gold. Johnson describes the sequence of separation distress, protest anger, then seeking clinging, then despair, then detachment. For therapy, the most important warning is detachment. She states that she has not seen couples return from that stage in practice. Whether or not we take that as an absolute, it's a powerful teaching point. When couples slide into emotional shutdown and resignation, urgency increases. This slide also connects directly to your earlier readings. The negative cycle is often a misfiring attempt to regain connection. Pursuit and withdrawal are organized around attachment panic and self protection. This is where you knit the hold me tight narrative back to the EFT techniques. The sequence is consistent with what students have already learned. Clarify the cycle, deepen attachment emotion, choreograph new disclosures and enactments, and consolidate new patterns. The point is that once couples feel emotionally safe, practical issues become easier. Skills are not the enemy. Skills become usable when the bond is stable. So moving to chapter 3, the emotions. Okay, so Johnson opens by naming the paradox. Emotion makes love exhilarating and terrifying. The very thing that gives love meaning, strong emotion, also exposes vulnerability. When we love, we are no longer fully in control. This is why many clients distrust emotion and try to manage relationships cognitively or behaviorally. EFT begins by reframing emotion not as a liability, but as the organizing force of attachment. If we don't understand emotion, love will always feel dangerous. Contemporary neuroscience has overturned the old emotion versus reason split. Emotion is not random or primitive, it is fast, adaptive, and essential. It tells us what matters. Without emotion, people cannot prioritize, decide, or act, even when their reasoning is intact. In relationships, emotion gives meaning to events, a look, a tone, a pause. EFT treats emotion as data, not noise. One of the most important shifts this chapter introduces is that emotion regulation is not meant to be solitary. Humans are wired to regulate emotion with others, especially attachment figures. When partners are emotionally accessible, fear and pain diminish. When the partner becomes unavailable, or worse, the source of threat, distress doubles. This explains why relationship distress feels so destabilizing and why EFT focuses on restoring the partner as a safe haven. Emotion unfolds incredibly quickly. A cue, such as your partner's tone or a turned back, travels through the brain before conscious thought. When threat feels high, emotion bypasses the cortex and goes straight to survival responses. This is why clients say, I don't know why I reacted that way. EFT works with this biology by slowing interaction down and helping partners access what emotion is signaling before action takes place. So this chapter deepens the logic behind the EFT distinction between primary and secondary emotion. And in attachment relationships, fear of loss or rejection is primary. Anger often comes later as protection or protest. Hurt is not a basic emotion, it is layered. Fear of abandonment, sadness over loss, and often anger on top. Clinically, when couples stay at anger, the cycle escalates. When fear and sadness are accessed, responsiveness becomes possible. Suppressing emotion doesn't work. It actually intensifies physiological arousal and relational strain. Suppression also blocks responsiveness. Partners sense the tension even if nothing is said. Naming emotions like this scares me or I feel hurt calms the nervous system and reorganizes experience. EFT's emphasis on emotional labeling and enactment is grounded in this science. What we name, we can regulate. Secure bonds allow people to turn emotion up or down as needed. When partners feel safe, they are less reactive, more reflective, and more open. Positive emotion broadens thinking and builds resilience, undoing the effects of fear and anger. EFT aims not just to reduce conflict, but to restore joy, playfulness, and curiosity, signals that the bond is alive and flexible again. All right, so moving to the brain. So today's framing is love is not just a feeling, it's a neurobiological organizing process. Johnson starts with a familiar falling in love vignette. Facial recognition, body sensations, mirroring posture, and a sense of safety. This is the social brain in motion. The key claim is that the brain is not an individualistic organ that happens to relate. It is constructed for relationship, for coordinating with other nervous systems. That's why EFT focuses on interactional patterns. It's targeting the brain's core relational operating system. Johnson emphasizes activation leads to architecture. Neural connections strengthen through repeated emotional interaction. When there's deprivation, like some monkeys isolated or institutionalized babies, there are measurable deficits, things like in emotion processing regions, in attention, language, illness risk, and later relational functioning. Clinically, you are not only hearing history, you are seeing developmental scaffolding or its absence expressed in present day regulation and responsiveness. The chapter also highlights the right hemisphere as a primary site for early emotional communication, things like face, tone, and rhythm. That's what creates felt safety. This is a core EFT bridge. Repair matters more than perfection. Infants learn that connection can be regained through repeated cycles of misattunement and repair. Over time, these cycles form templates. If I signal need, do I get comfort? If I show emotion, am I met or punished? Johnson's clinical examples, so for example, Marcus freezing when the partner expresses a need, map directly onto these templates. In EFT terms, they're not just changing skills, we're creating new expectations of accessibility and responsiveness. Here, Johnson leans into epigenetics without calling it that consistently. Repeated caregiving experiences can switch stress sensitivity up or down. The takeaway is not parents cause everything, but that experience is powerful enough to alter vulnerability trajectories, especially for highly sensitive orchid kids. Clinically, this helps us hold a non-blaming stance. Patterns are learned adaptations, and they can shift when new relational experiences repeatedly contradict old predictions. This is your cuddle hormone and why co-regulation works slide. Oxytocin is released not only during orgasm or breastfeeding, but through proximity and even thinking about a loved one. Johnson reviews studies suggesting oxytocin can shift insecure responses toward more affiliative ones and can lower cortisol in conflict discussion. The clinical translation: emotional accessibility is is physiologically calming. It also explains why just calm down fails when threat circuitry is active. Safety cues from an attachment failure can do what cognitive control cannot. So clinicians and trainees often get hung up here. So love is just neurochemistry? Johnson uses dopamine parallels to show why love is motivating and why separation hurts. But she also draws a clean distinction. Addiction constricts life and functioning. Secure love expands flexibility, exploration, and resilience. The important clinical implication is protective. Secure bonds can reduce reliance on external regulators, things like substances or compulsions, because relational regulation becomes available. This is one of the most EFT friendly parts. We don't infer our partner's inner world only through deliberate reasoning, we often embody it. Mirror neurons light up as if we were doing or feeling what we observe. Johnson highlights that mirroring is especially relevant in love because it supports rapid attunement, facial microexpressions, posture, tone. It also explains why synchrony, things like movement, breath, and pacing, can create felt closeness. Your nervous systems are literally coordinating. So, this slide helps us avoid moralizing empathy failures. Johnson offers three pathways. One, neurodevelopmental limitations. Two, chronic stress or depression, reducing social emotional capacity. And three, the most common, threat-based self-focus. When someone is flooded, they can't track their partner. This is classic EFT. When threat is high, partners protect, protest, and withdraw. Empathy collapses. So the goal is not to scold or for lack of empathy, it's to lower threat and increase safety so empathy becomes available again. So this is the hope slide. We are not stuck with early templates. Plasticity means experience can rewire responses, especially when new interactions are repeated and emotionally salient. Johnson gives an EFT consistent example, replacing freeze and shutdown with name, fear, and reach. Over time, partners become safer cues and new circuits strengthen. This is a clean rationale for why EFT focuses on enactments. Enactments are not performance, they are new relational experiences that become encoded. All right, so unraveling bonds. Johnson opens this chapter by directly challenging the fatalism many couples bring into therapy. Love just stops working. EFT reframes distress not as failure, mismatch, or pathology, but as attachment panic. When bonds feel threatened, partners protest, protect, and eventually shut down. This chapter is foundational because it shifts us from blaming individual to tracking bond processes. Johnson systematically dismantles popular explanation. So, gender differences are smaller than culture suggests. The one is a myth unsupported by attraction research, and evolutionary accounts confuse ultimate causation with lived experience. These narratives are demoralizing. They leave couples believing nothing can change. EFT replaces these myths with hopeful, mechanistic explanation. Relationships fail when emotional responsiveness breaks down. This is where Johnson pivots sharply away from skills-based models. Drawing on the work by John Gottman and Julie Gottman, she notes that all couples fight and that distressed couples don't necessarily lack communication skills. What predicts breakup is not how much couples fight, but how emotionally responsive and affectionate they are. Conflict is not the disease, it's the symptom of a threatened bond. Johnson introduces two pathways: slow erosion, where missed bids, lack of responsiveness, and emotional starvation accumulate, and then sudden shattering, where a betrayal or abandonment occurs at a moment of acute vulnerability. Both trigger primal fear and survival scripts. Clinically, this distinction matters because slow erosion requires restructuring daily responsiveness, while injuries require explicit repair. Using Bowlby's language of deprivation, Johnson shows how bonds unravel when partners stop turning toward each other emotionally. The critical finding is that absence of positive connection is more toxic than presence of conflict. So, research by Patch, Bradbury, and Huston shows that lack of reassurance, warmth, and emotional availability predicts later divorce, even more than anger or contempt. So this slide maps directly onto EFT case conceptualization. One partner pursues to restore connection. The other withdraws to regulate overwhelm. Both moves make sense internally, and both terrify the other partner. Johnson's metaphor of dance taking on a life of its own, of the dance taking on a life of its own, is key. The problem is not each partner, but the cycle. Johnson names criticism and stonewalling as uniquely destructive because they directly activate attachment thread. Research on criticism shows that disparagement from an attachment figure disables the brain's regulation systems. Stonewalling, especially emotional stillness, is even more catastrophic because it signals non-existence of the partner. This is where trainees begin to understand why just going quiet is not neutral. Johnson's use of Tronick's still face experiment makes this unforgettable. The infant's escalating panic mirrors adult partners' reactions to stonewalling precisely. This is a crucial teaching moment. Attachment systems do not age out. Doing nothing in a relationship is never neutral. It is perceived as abandonment. Here, Johnson draws on trauma theory, citing Judith Herman, to frame infidelity and abandonment as violations of human connection. The pain is not about sex, logistics, or fairness. It's about shattered assumptions of safety. This slide sets up the clinical necessity of structured repair, not reassurance or minimization. Johnson shows how couples get stuck after trauma. The injured partner interrogates, the injuring partner defends or withdraws. Both are trying to regulate fear, and both make things worse. Without an attachment framework, couples mistake emotional survival strategies for malice or immaturity. The Bonnie and Stan case illustrates moment-to-moment unraveling. Students should hear, or you should hear this as a process map, not a story. Every stage shows increasing rigidity, narrowing perception, and loss of empathy. By the end, partners aren't cruel, they're hopeless. This is the exact clinical state EFT is designed to treat. Johnson closes by restoring hope. Once couples understand the forces unraveling their bond, they can interrupt them. EFT's power lies in naming the cycle, softening attachment fear, and creating new moments of responsiveness that restore safety. This chapter prepares students to see couples not as high conflict or avoidant, but as desperate for connection. All right, y'all, and then the final chapter of this week's readings, Renewing Bonds. So Johnson opens by naming something every clinician recognizes, but few can articulate. Moments of reconnection feel transformative. EFT is concerned with how couples get there on purpose, not by accident. This chapter moves beyond stopping fights into building durable emotional bonds. The goal is not conflict management, it is secure attachment. So Patrick's wish to say the right thing mirrors many clients and many trainees early in training. Johnson emphasizes that renewal cannot be scripted. New conversations require emotional safety, co-regulation, and shared risk. EFT rejects the idea that one partner fixing the relationship. So, quoting John Bowlby, Johnson reminds us that attachment behavior is learned through experience. Some partners arrive with more emotional flexibility, but no one is secure alone. This is an explicitly non-individualistic model of change. So this slide is critical for undoing romantic myths. Secure relationships are not those without rupture, but those with effective repair. This needs again. So Johnson aligns here with the Gottmans, emphasizing that master couples differ not in conflict frequency, but in repair capacity. Using Tronick's research, Johnson shows that attunement failures are the norm, not the exception. What matters is how quickly and safely partners reconnect. This reframes therapy goals from emotional perfection to repair fluency. Attachment history shapes expectations about whether repair will happen. Importantly, Johnson emphasizes that a partner's responsiveness can buffer insecurity, meaning attachment is not destiny. This supports EFT's optimism about change, even in highly distressed couples. Johnson situates EFT within evidence-based practice, including fMRI research showing reduced threat responses when partners become secure. This is where you should clearly understand EFT is mechanism-driven, not technique-driven. A secure bond answers the question, "Are you there for me?" with a felt yes. These three elements provide trainees with a clear assessment lens they can apply immediately, that you can apply immediately in your role plays and case conceptualization. So looking for things like accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement within the couple. Okay, so before deep vulnerability, couples must regain balance. Naming the cycle, so for example, the pit or the maze, shifts blame away from the partner and restores collaboration. This is stage 1 of EFT work, and it is non-negotiable. So this is the heart of bond renewal. Change occurs when partners risk emotional exposure and ask directly for comfort, reassurance, and connection. These moments are not cognitive insights, they are felt emotional events. So trainees often ask, what do you actually do in EFT? So this slide tries to answer that. Hold me tight conversations are restructured or are structured emotional processes, not free-form sharing. Each task builds toward mutual accessibility and responsiveness. So here you're going to stay with the emotion, you signal clearly, you tolerate risks, you ask for needs, and you respond with care. That's what you're teaching the couple to do, and that's what you are modeling for the couple. So Johnson emphasizes that these moments are stored in memory as templates for connection. They make future disconnection feel manageable rather than catastrophic. This is how EFT creates durable change, not just symptom relief. So this slide is meant to integrate chapters 7 and 8. Secure bonding enables healing around sex and trauma. Importantly, forgiveness is not moral, it is attachment repair. EFT provides a map for both. And then I'll finish with you here that Johnson closes with a radical idea. Love is not mysterious or fixed. When couples understand attachment and learn to respond to vulnerability, they can renew bonds across a lifetime. This is the heart of EFT's hope.